My name is Dr. G. Welcome to That's Unusual, my podcast uncovering the unusual stories behind the world's most interesting people. On this show, we celebrate what makes us different and how we convert those differences into unexpected opportunities. Welcome to another exciting episode of That's Unusual. A big thank you to the thousands of listeners who tune in each week. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you don't miss an episode. You know what? Many can claim to be doctors, but only one can officially claim the moniker, the Doctor of the Future. And that's my good friend and guest for today, Dr. Jay Parkinson. He has graced the covers of some of the most recognized magazines and presented on the world's most prestigious stages. He possesses an unusual blend of doctor, technologist, and designer, and combines them in unusual ways to help heal our ailing medical system. Over a decade ago, Dr. Parkinson took a leap of faith. Having just wrapped up his residency in pediatrics and preventative medicine, he entered a strange universe where technology was becoming deeply integrated into the fabric of our daily lives. The iPhone had just been released, and video technology was just starting to gain mainstream adoption. So, what does a fresh out of residency doctor do? Using only his laptop, email, Google, and a friendly personality, Dr. Parkinson did what most others could not imagine. He made medical house calls out of his apartment in Brooklyn, New York. Overnight, Dr. Parkinson became a media sensation as the face of the future of medicine, and is considered a pioneer in a burgeoning billion-dollar market called telemedicine. Today, he is the co-founder of Sherpa, an on-demand, next-generation medical practice. Today in our conversation, we get personal and discuss it all in this episode. Dr. Parkinson walks us through his early influences on design, his infamous backyard parties in Brooklyn, the untold struggles and obstacles he faced for his early ventures, what he believes to be the doctor of the future, and even delve into the future of primary care. So sit back and enjoy the ride as you listen to today's episode. Now with that, let's get started. I'm with my good friend, Dr. Jay Parkinson today. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Hey, thanks. Good to be on it.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to finally get you on the schedule. So, you're a different breed of a doctor, right? You've got a creative slant, and you've been notoriously nicknamed the Doctor of the Future. And, if anyone does any searches on you, we'll certainly find many articles and posts written about you as the Doctor of the Future. You're a pediatrician trained, you're public health, preventative medicine. Take us back to why people have nicknamed you the Doctor of the Future. What brought you to that point?
Well, man, I've been called the Doctor of the Future for so long that it's kind of losing its relevance.
Well, I think it's actually even more relevant now. I mean, just even some of the work that you're doing. I mean, I think it's held its ground for the years.
Well, it's funny. The future in healthcare takes about 10 times as long as the future anywhere else. So I'm lucky to have this moniker. So hopefully when I'm like 90, I'll still be called that. But no, I think the reason why people did, back in, it was very interesting actually. June 29th, 2007 was when the iPhone was launched. And June 30th, 2007 was my last day of residency. And I didn't, have any idea what having a sort of location-aware computer in my pocket would enable, but I was definitely paying attention to how my friends were sending me emails of pictures of things that I didn't want to see on my friends, being like, hey, what is this? I was their doctor friend. So people would, email me, and I would answer them and help them. And I sort of just served as their doctor and advocate for this crazy, confusing healthcare system. So ended up eventually starting a house call practice that was powered by my iPhone. People would, read up on me, click on make an appointment. That would bring up my Google Calendar, and you could click on a time, tell me your address, and that would send an alert to my new iPhone. I'd do a house call in Brooklyn, and you'd pay me via PayPal, and we'd follow up on email or another in-person visit. But, it was really about just a super low overhead, highly efficient, affordable doctor solution for folks in Williamsburg and Greenpoint.
Now, take us back to that time. I mean, it sounds so obvious today, right? Like, given all the advancements that we've seen in technology and everything that's been developed in the digital health space and telehealth. But I mean, you paint a picture in 2007 where something like that was completely pioneering. And hence you've been given the term the doctor of the future, because nobody else was doing it back then, or at least doing it the way that you had thought about it, in a very simplistic yet, personal, person-centric way of delivering care. I mean, paint the picture of what technology in the landscape was like back then, because I don't think a lot of this stuff was developed.
Well, no, I mean, this was before the App Store, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, nobody had any idea what that would unleash, right? So, you really couldn't do this thing that I was doing until the iPhone, the mobile computer in your pocket could have come out. I mean, what did I have before this? I think it was like a Motorola Razor, right? You couldn't do that with that. So I don't know. I just it was this perfect, you can't recreate it. It was this perfect storm of, new technology, me graduating from residency, me not having, a family and kids to support, me being able to take a chance and be a weirdo and try to make things happen. And it just kind of worked. It's the technology. I really don't believe that technology is the solution. And, in so many ways, it's a cultural problem that we're dealing with. And technology is just one of those, tools. It's necessary, but it's not everything.
But making that home visit was, it's almost like a full circle back to the way medicine was practiced back in the day, where it really was about patient first and sort of making it work around their schedule and their needs. So here you are, you're in your apartment, I guess, in Brooklyn. And how did you operate? Did you have a practice? Was it just out of your home? How were the house calls done?
Oh man, it was just out of my home. I was graduating off a Hopkins resident salary, which was like $25,000 because it's an honor to be there, right? So I had zero money, and the whole thing cost only about $1,500 to get started. So, but luckily it was a sort of prepackaged press story. And so I got about 7.5 million hits on my site because, Fox News, CNN, Yahoo, back in the day when Yahoo was something, they sort of paid attention. And it was, I would say, the first sort of viral doctor practice because it was so perfectly aligned for a news story. It's like, the young doctor uses the internet to bring back Marcus Welby. It's I didn't really plan that, but it just so happened.
And so you've also, throughout your entire career, I guess even upbringing, you've always had sort of this creative slant, right? This sort of creative edge that a lot of other physicians did not necessarily have. I've gone through medical school, and to be honest, medical school sucks out every ounce of creativity from you for the most part, at least in the days that we trained. And I think I was even before you in my training. But, tell us about where that influence came from and how that philosophy was sort of built into some of the work that you would subsequently do.
And that's a good question because I've always been that guy that's just annoying. And he's been like, why do you do it this way? And it's just like that, it's a terrible person to be, right? At the same time, I think people like that, not just me, people like that change how things are done. I think you're right in that, I think the medical education in a sort of militaristic hierarchical manner sort of beats the creativity out of you. But I don't know. I think one of the things that that I think it's not unique to me, but I think one of my characteristics that I appreciate is just persistence. And, there is an element of just almost stupidity in that.
Was there anything in particular, in your upbringing, that perhaps your folks or your family or some other influences really sort of gave you a little bit of that creative inspiration and that creative bug? Because I've seen, even if you look at some of your blog posts, even stuff that you post around your apartment and the design of your apartment and the simplicity around it, you've got this great appreciation of, the beauty of design and how design can impact behavior. And that comes through, not even just the early days of what you did with your first, house call based system, but even the work that you did with Hello Health, with the Future Well, and the work that we did together with Omnio, and then subsequently Sherpa. I see that as a signature ingredient that comes with Jay Parkinson when he works on something.
Yeah, you have to have a look. If your look is sort of doctory and cheesy and traditional healthcare, you're just never going to stand out. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to you is nobody talks about you, and, in order to be talked about, if you can present yourself clearly, if you can present yourself in a beautiful way that stands out, you're just going to stand out and people are going to pay attention better. At the same time, that's just marketing and communication. But really, to me, like design in many ways is just process. I think of myself as a service designer, and service design incorporates both sort of the physical realm of the human to human conversation, but also the digital realm and sort of how those mesh together into one seamless experience it's not easy. I mean, you think about going to Starbucks, for example, which I wouldn't say is amazing, but I would say that like they have to think about like, what is the digital relationship to Starbucks? How does it interface with the physical relationship to Starbucks? And I think those questions are extremely vital to the future of healthcare because so much of healthcare is going to be both digital and physical.
Yeah, great points. It's not by chance that you sort of live in Brooklyn. Are you currently in Williamsburg?
Yeah, man, I've been in the
which is notorious for being a great, surrounded by a lot of creatives. And I think there's a sort of this, underground sort of picture of people have known about your backyard parties that you host, behind your home. And it attracts a lot of the folks from in and around the neighborhood. I mean, has that influenced you at all in terms of the people that you're interacting with in your neighborhood and sort of what defines who you are?
Yeah, I mean, that to me is what's so great about New York, but specifically sort of Brooklyn and those areas. I mean, it is a mecca for sort of creativity. I think, a lot of people would say like, well, obviously San Francisco is the home of the internet. But in many ways, that's true. In New York, we sort of have a smaller home in the internet, but we also have all the other, fashion, art, news, media, everything is based in New York. And we all run into each other. And sort of my whole philosophy from day one is like, how can we take something that like, Flickr did back in the day and make it relevant to healthcare? And that's why I think living in a city like New York is so important because all you should do is steal from other industries and try to use that to make healthcare better.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, lots of things that we can learn from other industries. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to this notion of the doctor of the future. What, in your view, not just about like, how doctors are going to, but what is the role of the doctor in the future, right? So we've seen technology, come a long way over the past decade or so, since you started your first online practice. What's changed in that aspect, and what do you foresee as being the doctor of the future?
I think there's going to be two sort of primary care things. The first thing is going to be the virtualist. I think you're going to go online before you get in-person care. In-person care is extremely expensive. And I know that 70% of things that happen in person now don't need to happen if there's good digital infrastructure. It's going to be based on continuity. So you're essentially going to be like an online primary care doctor, but not so much just diagnosing and treating. It's equally important to be a navigator and a sort of connector into the physical in-person suppliers of the neighborhood. That I think is really exciting because if you can take 70% of those visits that don't need to happen in the neighborhood, you can just make healthcare so much less costly and more efficient. And, to me, that's just ridiculously exciting.
Mm-hmm. So what does that mean in terms of the future doctor? I mean, are we training them properly? So we might be able to create systems around this, right? So things like you've done with, first Hello Health, and then some of the design work you did with FutureWell, which we'll get into, and now Sherpa. What needs to change in terms of preparing this future doctor for how medicine will be practiced in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't think there's much difference here, as a virtualist, because, when you think about what a doctor does, they're really just sort of investigators, right? They ask a bunch of questions and then they confirm suspicions with something objective. Oftentimes, the objective confirmation can be a test, like a lab test or an X-ray. But it doesn't always have to be in-person physical exam. Sometimes it can be time. Like, hey, this could be gas or it could be, appendicitis. But we're going to know in 2 hours if it's gotten better or gotten worse. And let's just reconnect. So there's all these sort of like new ways that you can sort of practice as a virtualist. But you really have to be in tune for sort of red flags that come across in terms of, text rather than sort of an in-person gait or physical experience that you would see in physical exam.
Yeah, because part of the history in physical, when they come into the office, is we've been trained a lot to sort of pick up on visual cues. So
Right.
does some of that get lost in terms of the virtual visit?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of it does get lost, but you also gain certain things. So, for example, if everybody that reaches out to you and is complaining of abdominal pain gets the same data-driven 30 questions, and you can say a person that answers these 30 questions in the following manner has a 99.9% chance of not having appendicitis. You have data to support your suspicion just based on, volume. So there are things that are sort of, it's just more advantageous to sort of communicate via messaging. The other thing is, people don't have to think on their feet like they do in an exam room. Whenever you can just respond to a question via, messaging. And I think there's a lot of value in that. Like the other day, we actually, asked a question of somebody, a series of questions on a Friday, and didn't get a response back until Monday morning. And she prefaced the response with, "I've been thinking about the answers to these questions all weekend." And that to me was ridiculously powerful in, the quality of communication that you can have with people. It's not just oral.
Great points. I want to get really deep into some of the stuff that you're talking about here, especially looking at various, the primary care models that have arisen and how you sort of look at it from your lens and the comparisons between them. I love this notion that you brought up called the virtualist, because I almost feel like in our time, the specialty of a hospitalist was something that didn't exist 20 years ago in sort of the modern sense of the word hospitalist. In fact, it's a sort of dedicated specialists who serve in hospital care. But the virtualist is almost like a new specialty to some degree, which requires a little bit of a different sense of training in terms of understanding how to leverage technologies in ways to your advantage from a communication standpoint to get what you need to better investigate the patient, which is really cool. And I want to dig into that because you're addressing a lot of this stuff within your current platform called Sherpa. Before we get into Sherpa, let's take a step back. Before Sherpa, you had sold off your company to what became Hello Health and then went on to do FutureWell, which is sort of a design company. I'm probably butchering the description of it. I'm sure there's much more to it. But that ultimately led you to Sherpa and some of your thinking around what needs to change there. So can you just walk us through that period of your time between setting up, selling off to Micah and creating Hello Health and then doing the FutureWell and then Sherpa?
Yeah. Hello Health, it's very interesting. I think my practice back in 2007 definitely spun off the concept of this thing needs a platform. Mm-hmm. And so, back in early 2008, I partnered with a gentleman to co-found Hello Health. And, it really is sort of like and they're still around. If Facebook could meet an electronic medical record, what would it look like to power an in-person brick and mortar practice? I think it's interesting. And
you were also, if I recall correctly, you were encountering a lot of unexpected legal inquiries around some of the stuff that you were doing because it was so novel and new that most people didn't know how to sort of address that.
Yeah. But at the same time, if you sort of just have a adult to adult communication conversation around what we're attempting to do, those legal issues just really go away. As long as you're not being cavalier around, sort of super gray zones in healthcare, it just takes a conversation to make those things sort of go away, which is, a lesson that I've learned. It's like be open and be honest, but also design a process so that it's got sort of baked in quality control into it. But Hello Health was, whenever you start a company, it's really like dating someone and getting married in a lot of ways. And, sometimes the relationships are tough. So, that's, to put it lightly, that's sort of what happened. And, just decided to move on, but at the time didn't have a great idea. And I knew that there were big brands out there that were like, hey, what does this internet mean to healthcare? So we worked with, a couple of pharma brands, NHS, Planned Parenthood, you guys at Physicians Interactive, and did some wonderful things in those 3 years.
So looking back now, almost 10 years, is there anything from sort of an entrepreneurial lesson standpoint, is there anything you would have done differently?
Oh, man. Well, I think number one, I think all companies should have co-founders. And I think you don't need to get married in the first month. I think I would definitely be more, I just allow more time to sort of date, quote unquote, before you jump in and get married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you certainly brought that thinking into when you started Sherpa and bringing on a co-founder with that as well, after you'd sort of laid down the initial work for it. So you had mentioned you and I had worked together briefly as well, and sort of that's where I got to know a little bit about your design philosophies and getting to know you a little bit better. We created Omnio together, which is a medical app for physicians for their labs and, drug lookups and so forth. And that was a great experience that we had. I learned a lot about just the application development process and the product development design process, and a lot about you. Now, from there, you went on and established the basis for what would now become Sherpa. Tell us about how you went from what you were doing with FutureWell to launching Sherpa.
That was a bit of a challenge, but, one of the things that I sort of just got tired of was creating a great idea. And, honestly, working with you, it was sort of like we created something really great together. And then we just sort of had to turn it over to someone else to execute on. Mm-hmm. And it got so frustrating because it's like, you need to own something longer than just a few months to make it great.
Yeah.
So actually, that was the last main thing that I did with the FutureWell was work with you, because I think it's more like, I just needed to own something for a long time to really do something significant and meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and was there a particular experience or moment where you realized that Sherpa was the thing, or was it something that's been marinating over the course of a number of years and a logical extension to the work that you did with your first initiative?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to do the same thing over and over and expect different results, so.
Well, I mean, a lot of people take, their initial concept, and then they, once it goes into the hands of a corporate entity, oftentimes they see it butchered in many ways, that they see, a different way to the future using the same sort of philosophy of the sort of virtual element. And I feel like to some degree, you did still take the core element of that virtual visit, although you were making house calls as well, and just made it, 10 times better with what you do with Sherpa. Maybe just for the listeners, explain, as briefly as you can, what Sherpa is.
Sure. We're basically just an on-demand primary care practice. Individuals can sign up as well as companies. And anytime someone has a medical issue, they create a profile, create a case. Our doctors read that case, ask a bunch of questions, maybe order tests, diagnose and treat, e-prescribe through the platform, follow up and own the situation from beginning to end. That might be 10 minutes. It might be 10 months. But it really is sort of like if you could have your primary care doctor exclusively online and have that ongoing continuity relationship with them. That's what Sherpa is.
So what category does this fall into? Is it a traditional telehealth company? We've seen the words tossed around like Uber for healthcare, and we've seen things like Pager pop up, and then we have different primary care models like Iora Health and One Medical Group. What makes this different and / better than the rest that's out there? Because everyone's trying to experiment with the different primary care models.
Yeah, it's capability. I think we handle about the same breadth of sort of conditions as a traditional primary care doctor because we bake in continuity. It's not Uber for doctors in that, every time you fire up a case on Sherpa, you're going to be talking to a random stranger. It's really, you're going to be talking with the same doctors, and you can build technology that enables that. So it's continuity based. Because of that, because we can sort of order tests and follow up and own things, we're not restricted to like pink eye or common colds. We can do, the first person that signed up for Sherpa actually ended up having, cancer that we diagnosed and had it, treated within the span of 3 days. It's sort of go into full-on care coordination mode whenever, a sort of diagnosis and treatment exclusively virtual is not the right answer. Sometimes you need to really organize your network together and bring everybody together for the sake of the patient to get things done quickly.
Yeah, I love the continuity aspect of it because I feel like so many solutions out there are making our healthcare environment even more fragmented than it already is. And I feel like we're having a loss of continuity in the case of a lot of patients. And of course, with a number of chronic conditions, continuity is critical in terms of getting optimal care, especially as we move towards value-based, preventative, outcomes-based care. What's the model like? Does the patient have to pay every time they utilize Sherpa as a service? Is it employer-based? Tell us a little bit about that model.
Well, so the employers have two options. They can cover the full cost of care for the patient, or they can cost share with the patient or with the employee. So there's basically just a sort of like a sliding model for that, like percent of.
So is that almost like a copay, except not with the insurance, but with your employer?
Exactly. Okay.
So
we don't deal with insurance at all. We're sort of this layer on top of any insurance plan that sort of, helps you spend that deductible that's increasing every year for people much better. So for individuals,
so people can apply their deductible to your service, or is this in addition to the deductible?
So it's in addition to the deductible. So for example, I'll tell you the sort of business model for the individuals. It's $25, $40, or $100 a month. And really what the difference in plans gets you is more sort of synchronous communication with doctors, with our doctors. So, video visits with the same doctors, phone visits with the same doctors. The things that sort of a doctor's time is the most expensive thing for us. So whenever things are asynchronous, it's hyper efficient. Whenever you have to jump on the phone with people, it's less efficient. So the $25 plan, for example, is the equivalent of one urgent care visit, right? But it's unlimited care. You don't pay for every message or every case. And it's just very simple. It's just, sort of like Netflix for healthcare.
Yeah, I love the simplicity of it. And it's what I even love more about this is that if you go to your website and look up, the information around Sherpas, you're just not selling an idea of service here. You back it up with data. I mean, there's so much information that you've mined in terms of making this a better option for employers, for, the staff of the organization. I mean, clearly the numbers turn out in favor of what you're doing, and it makes just good common sense to do that and to put in the layer of Sherpa for many of these organizations. What, in your view, I mean, now looking back, you've been in operation for 5 years now?
Just 5 years as of last week. Yep.
Wow. Congratulations on that. So what have you learned? I mean, obviously there's, lots of heartache, in starting up a company. You started off with a couple of, key customers like Tumblr and your friend David Karp over there. But what have you learned over the course of time in working with these organizations? Did you have to shift anything? Were there things that were unexpected?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the last 5 years, we raised about $10 million in VC money. I personally think that the VC model is not the right model for healthcare because that model is essentially they're shooting for a 10x return of their investment in 7 years. 7 years is not fast enough in healthcare. It's just too fast. Healthcare is ridiculously glacial. And, I was having the same conversation 10 years ago than I am today in so many ways. And so it's really about sort of, how can you create a sustainable business, which we are now, a profitable, sustainable business that doesn't require VC funding, sort of grow and execute on.
Yeah, I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had with young entrepreneurs who think that the VC money is basically the trophy of success. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And in fact, it actually hinders a lot of the progress and development they've made. So I couldn't agree with you more in terms of, it's one thing to get the support for using VC money for growth, but setting the expectations in terms of how fast you're going to grow and being able to turn it around to a profitable business is, certainly not something that's regularly practiced in the industry. So kudos to you for understanding that and building it, with a strong foundation and base. So where's Sherpa going next? So what's next for Sherpa? Where do you plan on growing? I think you guys you've expanded nationally. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're in about 45 states now.
Oh, great. So almost all states. Great.
Cool. Yeah. We are mainly focused on selling into large businesses around ER prevention. That's it. It's really simple. For every 1,000 employees, there's 160 ER visits every year. 80% of those are unnecessary. The whole point is just get people treated before they get expensive in-person care. That's it. That's number one. Number two, I'm excited because this week we're actually launching what I think is the beginning of what's called the Sherpa Marketplace. So, for example, we're starting with dermatology. So when a case becomes something that we need to refer you to a dermatologist, we're actually looping in our dermatologist. We'll charge, say, $200 for a 30-day program to get your, acne under control.
Mm-hmm.
So those
care pathways around specific conditions?
Yeah, that are powered by specialists. It's also the same thing for, which this is very early, but I think is going to be launched within the month, commodities like chest x-rays. Purchasing a chest x-ray via Sherpa, showing up at the radiologist, showing them the receipt, getting the x-ray, and then leaving.
Yeah.
Right? So pre-purchasing commodity services and products and sort of having that be part of your medical record within Sherpa. And I'm super excited about the marketplace.
So if you were to take out a crystal ball and look at primary care in 10 years from now, where do you see this all headed? Is it a zero-sum game? Do you think that some are going to win, some are going to lose? Or are there just going to be, 5 to 10 to 15 different models of primary care and people just get to choose what they want?
I would say instead of 10 years, I would say 20 years.
Okay. The glacial speed, right?
the glacial speed. And I would also say in 20 years' time, health insurance is going to double 3 times. The cost of health insurance is going to double 3 times in those 20 years. That's just the curve that we've been seeing for the last, 40 years.
And that's regardless of who's in office.
Yeah. That's just irrelevant. And so in a lot of ways, I think this next doubling of costs is kind of the big come to Jesus moment.
Mm-hmm.
In that, whenever it costs you $30,000 to go to the ER, something else is going to happen. So I actually have no idea what that looks like. Again, I think it looks like Sherpa, but, that's just me being
So when it comes to healthcare, looking at everything that's been developed, of course, you've been involved with a number of innovations. You're on the front lines of what's happening out there. There's a lot of noise in the marketplace. Yeah. Do you see a lot of the current developments that are happening in healthcare, of course, Sherpa aside, all the developments happening? Do you see the glass half full or half empty in terms of the progress we're making?
I think the problem is people are trying to incrementally change healthcare. Meanwhile, the costs are not keeping up with the incremental innovation. So in a lot of ways, I think you just need to blow up the whole concept of what care is. And, I just read a recent article called, it was just about cost disease. Really amazing. Basically, healthcare, education, things in America have gone up 10 times the cost since 1970 with no significant change in quality. And, that kind of the disease of increasing costs and not having any idea why or how to fix this, it's just, I'm really worried about that. So in a lot of ways, we can't look at primary care and just sort of try to incrementally change what it looks like by maybe adding some, chronic disease phone call management to a broken system. We need to blow it up and be like, what is care? And how does it affect people's bank account and sustainability and housing and education? It's a mess. I honestly, it's like, I can't even wrap my head around it. I wish. So
how would you define care?
Well, first of all, it has to be realistic. One of the things that we do whenever we prescribe a medication or a referral is the patient has 2 options. They can either approve the medication or deny the medication. If they approve it, they choose the pharmacy and they pick it up. If they deny it, they tell us why. Oftentimes people are like, well, I'm never going to take this, or it's too expensive, or I tried this in the past, it didn't work. So you really have to get something that's realistic and get buy-in to people before the order goes through to even be realistic about a plan that you as a doctor have created.
Yeah, that's good points. And how do you factor in, for example, as we all talk about these buzzwords of outcomes-based care and accountable organizations and value-based systems and prevention. But a lot of that also has to factor in the sort of soft elements of health, which is, the socioeconomic factors, our living conditions, the food we put on our body, how much activity we're getting, our mental state, all of that I feel like are still, there's no holistic solution per se that gets to that answer and gets to that value-based system, but all fragmented in today's environment. How do we tackle that?
And I have no idea.
Well, maybe those are questions we can leave for our listeners to ponder on. But, big questions in healthcare. And, you're doing some amazing things with Sherpa. I think Sherpa is certainly a wave of the future. Initially when we had the conversation, I was like, where's Sherpa going to go? And now I see the impact it's actually having in the marketplace. And I think it's a phenomenal thing. And I think you're onto something really big here in terms of giving everybody their sort of, just like Uber gives everyone their personal driver, you're giving everybody the opportunity to have their personal health navigator and coach before the system eats up all of their money and savings, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's the goal.
So I think, amazing stuff, Jay. I think this is sort of a good segue into sort of the last segment of our conversation, something I ask all of our guests. And these are sort of the 5 rapid fire, Mad Lib, fill in the blank questions. So if you're cool with it, we'll get started on those.
Sure.
All right, let's do this. All right. So the first one I have for you, the best piece of advice I ever received was?
I would say, have a vision, be persistent, but also be patient.
Very good. Yeah, those are good ones and certainly lessons you learned over the course of time in your endeavors. Next one for you. I am most curious about.
Man, this cost disease thing just makes me crazy. I'm really highly intrigued as to why things are increasing in cost out of control, and we need to figure out, what to do about it.
So this is it. That's what gets you up in the morning and keeps you up at night.
Seriously, I mean, housing, education, healthcare is consuming 80% of our salaries now. It's like,
yeah.
What are we going to do about that? I have no idea.
Yeah. It is a big problem. It is a very big problem. Okay, next one for you. If you had to write an autobiography, of course, about yourself, the title of the book would be?
Oh, man. I just think it's persistence. Honestly, it's like stupid persistence, I think. It's, stupid persistence would be.
Why stupid in front of it?
Well, sometimes you just have to be crazy. Sometimes you have to be sometimes you have to do things that, go against like what you think might even be the right thing to do, just to be persistent and and patient.
Did you ever have moments in the course of developing Sherpa and the other stuff where you questioned yourself or double question yourself?
Every day. I mean, whenever you when you're an entrepreneur, you sacrifice a lot.
Yeah.
I could be making much better salary working for something that's, probably I wouldn't be super excited to get up in the morning about.
Yeah. But this is certainly fitting a larger purpose. And so good. Okay. So next one for you, 2 more to go. If you could invite 3 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would you invite and what would you talk about? And just to add in there, it could be objects too. People have given examples of a cartoon caricature if they wanted.
All right. I would say my grandfather as a 20-year-old.
Okay.
I would say...
And who's before you give the others, who was your grandfather? What did he do? What was so interesting about him?
He didn't drop out of school, but he didn't make it past 8th grade. And then, 2 decades later, he found himself as the lead foreman that built Gemini and Apollo. And,
wow.
I have all this space memorabilia because he's the guy that built the spacecraft. And,
wow.
Without an education, it's just pure hard work. And he was the only one. It was a very blue collar family and farmer family before he sort of came into existence. And he's the one that's put the Parkinson family policy in place that we will pay for your education. And,
Parkinson family policy. At what point in your family history did medicine come into the picture? Are you the first, or do you have you were the first?
Oh yeah, definitely. Everybody else, I mean, my parents are educated, but most folks are pretty blue collar.
Wow. So what was that moment where you said, I want to be a doctor? Sorry, I'm just going a little off course here, but I'm curious about that.
That's okay. No, just, I think in high school, I had a really great, sort of science teacher and got me all excited about science and the human body. And I just thought, hey, I could really help people out by being a doctor. And it was a huge challenge. I love huge challenges. So I dug in.
It's amazing how those certain influences at the points in life can have such a lasting impact on what you do and how you do it. I had an amazing English teacher. I hated English when I was in high school, but I went on to become a creative writing major and an English lit major when I was in college. And it's amazing just from the influences of the people around you, which is pretty cool. All right. So I interrupted you. So you said your grandfather is one of them. Who are the other two?
I would say Eugene Debs. I think he's a very interesting character. He was the only person to run for president of the United States from a jail cell and got over 5% of the vote,
Wow.
I think he's an interesting guy, and he really sort of created, one of the most powerful quotes that I know. It was basically like, hey, all the, normal people are sitting in sort of forgotten graves. You have to be abnormal to be remembered and influential. So I really respect him a lot. And then I think the third one would be, I really love Cormac McCarthy. I like his writing. I like his commentary on U.S. culture. I think it would be just a weird dinner party, man.
That'd be pretty cool. I love that line you just said. You have to be abnormal in order to be influential, which is really resonates a lot with what we do at Unusual. So cool. I like your dinner party list, man. That's a cool, I'd love to be there as well. All right. So the last question for you. So of course, on this podcast, we like to celebrate what makes all of us unique and different, that helps us stand out. That's kind of how we define unusual. So in your case, how would you fill in the following blank? I'm unusual because...
being a doctor and sort of being surrounded by this, a hardcore motivation to fit in, I guess I chose not to. And I feel really good about that. I feel like, the world doesn't get any better if you're just following the crowds. So it takes a lot. And like I said, it takes, going against your best interest sometimes to be unusual. So I made it work.
No, well said. I totally resonate with that one too, because I remember back in my medical school days, back in the late 90s, it was almost looked down or frowned upon if you had any other thoughts besides practicing medicine. Mm-hmm. And there I was, of course, it was the internet heyday, and all this, shiny new technology stuff was really, catching my eye and attention. And I used to have to hide the Standard magazine and Wired magazines in the middle of my, pathology book, or in the middle of my biochemistry book, so no one would see it. It's certainly a different world today, where a lot of schools and residencies encourage that type of interaction. But back in the day when you and I had sort of gone through it, it wasn't like that. And we certainly had to sort of carve our path forward. So Jay, always a delight talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the show. Before we wrap up here, though, if somebody wanted to learn more about you, get more information about the work that you're doing, anything else that you're up to, where would you direct them to go?
Just Twitter, Medium, Tumblr. I'm sort of everywhere. But I've been doing a lot of my writing on Medium lately, so follow me there. Okay, great. Perfect. And if they wanted to learn more about Sherpa? Oh, man, Sherpa.com. 2 A's. 2 A's. All right. SHERPAA.com. Mm-hmm. Very cool, Jay. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you. Definitely. Hi again. It's me, Dr. G. If you are still listening, I'm hoping it's because you enjoyed this podcast. If you would like to hear future episodes, you could really help me out by subscribing to the That's Unusual podcast on iTunes and leaving a review. It goes a long way in helping me get the word out from avid listeners like you. As a thank you, I will be selecting one new reviewer each week at random for a free private 15-minute phone conversation where you can ask me anything and get professional advice on your career or business to help you stand out and make a difference. Also, if you want to be notified of any future episodes, please visit that'sunusualpodcast.com and sign up to receive updates on new episode releases. Until next time, remember to always think unusual.